have been, for the last 3 years, slowly working our way through Matthew, and we are coming to the end. We are not quite halfway through Matthew chapter 27. Matthew 27 and Matthew 27 is a very big, not a long chapter. It is pretty long, but not as long as chapter 26. But it is a big chapter because of the events that occur. We're talking about the end of Jesus' ministry. We're now talking about his Passion Week. We're talking about really the trial, the last days, the last hours of Jesus' life. And so it's really important for us to really think through and digest this. It's interesting how Matthew has couched the conversations, because he started in chapter 26 with the trials before the religious leaders. And then he digressed and he talked about Peter, and on the flip side of that talked about Judas. We talked about that the last time we were here. We talked about Peter and Judas and both of their, I'm going to say, failings, and how they approached those failings and what they did as a result of those failings. It's really hard to articulate Judas's mind frame, partly because we honestly weren't there. We don't know. We can assume a lot of things. And my presumption about Judas, and I've tiptoed around this and dived into the bush several times, but essentially I feel Judas was a ladder climber, a power seeker, a position seeker, and he was riding Jesus' coattails. As long as he thought Jesus was going to get him somewhere, he was riding Jesus' coattails. When he decided that Jesus wasn't who he thought he was going to be, he wasn't going to get him where he wanted to go, then he switched alliances to the people that he thought could help him. And that's how we see Judas going to the religious leaders and saying, hey, I can turn Jesus in. Now, we already talked about the other ideas about why Judas may have done that, trying to urge Jesus to become the Messiah that he thought he should be. I just don't think that was right. But it could be. But I see Judas as, you remember the parable of the talents? You had the gentleman that had the 5 talents and he doubled them. He used those talents and he doubled them. Then he had the gentleman who had the 2 talents and he used those and he doubled them. And then he had the gentleman that had the 1 talent and he hid it. And we talked about that. When he hid it, it wasn't hid because he was scared necessarily. He hid it so he could find out who was going to come out on top. Because it could have been the master, or it could have been who was going away. Remember, the master was going away to be made king. If he wasn't made king, then all of his opposition would have won. And so then he would have changed alliances and given that 1 talent to the opposition. And so that's why he didn't grow that talent. We talked about that back then, whenever we discussed that. But that's how I see Judas. Judas had the talent. Jesus gave him the resources, but he sat on those resources because he wasn't quite sure who was going to come through. And so he was ready to give his resources to whomever came out on top. And then he had some remorse. He was caught. And because he didn't look to Jesus for his salvation, he had nothing left to do but take his own life. Peter, on the other hand, did look to Jesus for his salvation, did look to Jesus as in friendship, was in his sorrow, he was remorseful, he was repentant, and so he had someone to go back to. He had his faith, he had his friends. Remember, we talked about Judas didn't have friends to go back to. He deserted and ruined his friendships, burned those bridges. So we had those conversations last week, or the week before last. If you've been following the idea of choosing sides, this whole little business, the last probably month, I've had choosing sides up there. And the verse that I had up there before was Paul's verse in Ephesians when it says that our fight isn't against flesh and blood. It's really a spiritual fight. And we need to choose daily which side we're going to land on, which side we're going to fight for. Today I used a different verse because I think it fits well with what we're going to talk about. Today's verse is where Jesus himself says you can't serve two masters. You're either going to love one and hate the other. You're going to serve one and deny the other. You can't serve God and worldly things, or worldly vision, a concept. And I think that fits well with what we're going to talk about today. As we move into Jesus, we'll call it political trials. The trials that he had in front of Pilate and also in front of Herod, the king up in the Galilean region. And then again, Pilate. So we have three trials that we're looking at. Matthew only talks about, really you only see it as one trial. But we're going to jump to John and Luke to see that there were actually three different trials. So let's read Matthew 27, starting in verse 11. We'll read through it, but then we'll circle back, as we often do, and we'll pick up some nuggets from the other Gospels as well. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor. Before we get to that point, let's jump back to verse 1 in the same chapter. Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people made their plans how to have Jesus executed. Now, we talked a little bit about that just at the end of the last time we were here. What does it mean they made their plans? They had already convicted Jesus, but remember, the Jewish people did not have the right to put people to death. At that point, the Roman rule had taken away their right to put people to death. So they had to convince Pilate that there was reason for Jesus to be put to death. So they had to make plans. What were those plans? Do we know much about that? We do. We do. If we look in Luke chapter 23, so if you jump just quickly to Luke 23, it says in verse 1, they led him off to Pilate. Verse 2, they began to accuse him, saying, we have found this man, my version says, subverting our nation. Now, that's a hard word to kind of chew on. Misleading, some of your versions may say. Misleading the nation. He opposes, that's number one. Number two, he opposes payment of taxes to Caesar. And number three, he claims to be Messiah, a king. Now, did any of those things really, well, actually the third one did, but did the first two bother the Jews? Not really. They didn't care. In fact, they would prefer, I guess depending on how you read the first one, but the taxes thing, they didn't want to pay taxes to Caesar either. So what I'm saying here is they tried to find something in the course of Jesus' life that would convince Pilate that this guy, Jesus, was anti-Roman. That this one, he was really the kind of person that Pilate might want to take out because of his disposition, because of how he was leading the Jews. So let's think through this. Misleading the nation. Essentially, that was an accusation that Jesus was teaching in opposition to the religious commands. That he was trying to overturn or cause an uproar among the people, saying, you remember a lot of the Sermon on the Mount we talked about, Jesus would say, you have heard it said this, but I tell you this. And so in the religious mind, one might think, or they would try to say, that he was subverting their religious customs, or he was misleading people by telling them to do something different that the law didn't say. He went against a lot of the oral laws that were out there at the time. And we could say, if we go back to Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 and 18, Jesus himself said, I came not to destroy the law and the prophets, but I came to fulfill them. So So in truth, he wasn't subverting, he wasn't misleading, he was correcting a lot of times. But when you're already pursuing the wrong path, correction sure sounds hard, doesn't it? It's hard to swallow. But Jesus himself was not trying to destroy the Jewish religion, destroy the Jewish nation. He himself said, I am fulfilling all of the Old Testament that you say that you're following. So, the item number one that they tried to accuse him with was a false accusation. Number two, that he refuses or opposes paying taxes to Caesar. Was that true or was that false? That was false. We could go to Matthew 22. Remember, they brought him the coin, trying to trick him into saying that he opposed taxes. And yet he didn't. What did he say? Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, but render unto God the things that are God's. In other words, yes, pay your money to Caesar as you are required to do. Well, we have a hard time with that today too, don't we? Tax season comes around, inflation happens. But pay to the government the things that are the government's, but give your heart to God. That's what Jesus said. So in no way, shape, or form did he say, don't pay your taxes. So, accusation number two, true or false? False. Accusation number three, he claims to be king. True or false? True. But we will read in John, he tells Pilate, not that kind of king. Their accusation was trying to frame Jesus as a rebel, as an insurgent, as someone who would replace Caesar. And in Pilate's mind, that would have been a shock. That would have been a reason to remove him from society. That's how they tried to couch Jesus. But Jesus himself said, and it kind of shocked Pilate when he confronted Jesus, are you a king? And most of the people who Pilate would have seen, and he would have seen people claiming to be king or wanting to get rid of the Roman government, they were rebellious. They were angry kind of people. Jesus did not approach him, or the confrontation between Pilate and Jesus was not angry. It was not, Jesus didn't fit the paradigm of someone who claimed to be king and wanting to overthrow Caesar. And so Pilate himself was kind of confused and shocked. He was surprised at the demeanor of Jesus. And so Jesus tells him, yes, I'm a king, and we'll talk about that, but not in the way that you think, not in the way that they have accused me of. So it's a half-truth. It is true that he claimed to be king, but it was not true that he claimed to be a king that would sit on a throne, a physical throne, and take over the Roman government. So they have prepared their arguments for Pilate. So jumping back down, it says they bound him and led him and handed him over to Pilate the governor. Jumping down to 11. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, are you the king of the Jews? You have said so, Jesus replied, which is the same as saying yes. It's as you say, or you said it. We say that a lot of times today. You said it. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, did you hear the testimony they are bringing against you? Okay, we talked about those testimonies. Jesus made no reply, not even a single charge, to the amazement of the governor. Now, if you remember back to Isaiah said he would keep silent. Isaiah said he would not defend himself. Now, it was the governor's custom at the festival to... Now, I want you to notice, Matthew just kind of zips through this pretty fast. So we're going to read through it, but we're going to go to some other Gospels that kind of give us a little more nuggets in here. But it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, that is a custom, by the way, that is not documented across the Roman Empire. So if it truly was a custom, and all the Gospels talk about it, it was localized to the Jews. And it was also localized to this one event per year, the Passover event per year. And I think it was simply because Passover was kind of the, if you remember, it's the freedom from bondage. It's the freedom from Egypt. And it symbolizes this passing from being in bondage to freedom. And so, to some extent, it became a custom that they would free one of the prisoners, emblematic of the Passover. Okay. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. We might circle back to that. While Pilate was sitting in the judge's seat, this is a little nugget that Matthew gives us. None of the other Gospels give us this. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him a message. "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. So they said, "Free Barabbas, crucify Jesus." "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood is on us and our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. There is so much going on there, some of which Matthew skips over. So before we go into detail on any of this, let's jump over to Luke 23. We've already been there once today. Let's jump over to Luke 23 and see one other thing. When Pilate is trying to talk to the crowd lets him know that this is a man of Galilee. Jesus was from Galilee. Now in Pilate's mind, he's like, "Oh, that's nice. Herod from Galilee, who was king over that area, is also here in town, probably in town because of the Passover. I'm going to send him over to Herod and let Herod take care of him, because I'm not seeing everything I need to see in this, and Herod probably knows a little bit more about the religious stuff, and, if he is convicted, it's not going to be on me, and I don't have to, account for it to Tiberius, Caesar." So he sends him over to Herod. Looking down, verse 6. On hearing this, that he was from Galilee, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased because for a long time he'd wanted to see him. Why? Because Jesus did miracles. Herod wanted to see a miracle. He's like, "Oh, this is cool. Finally, I get to see him perform a sign." From what he heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there, vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and the soldiers ridiculed him and mocked him, dressed him in an elegant robe, and they sent him back to Pilate. That day, this is an interesting point, Herod and Pilate became friends because before this, they had been enemies. So, Herod and Pilate were like, "Okay, we don't know what to do with this guy. Yeah, people don't like him. Let's be friends." So he went to Herod. Herod asked him many questions. It doesn't tell us what the questions were. But Herod was, we know, expecting to see some sort of miracle. More for entertainment purposes, I think, than for real judicious kind of reasons. When Jesus didn't comply, Herod didn't know what to do with it. Because honestly, Herod didn't find anything wrong with what Jesus had done. And so he's like, yeah, I don't know. So we're just going to make fun of him for a little while and then send him back to Pilate. That's considered one of the trials. So he already had a trial before Pilate. Pilate didn't know what to do with him. Found out he was Galilean, sent him over to Herod. Herod is now having a trial with him. Herod doesn't know what to do with him. Herod's going to send him back to Pilate for a second trial in front of Pilate. John 18 gives us a little more information. Actually, a lot more of the conversation that happens between Pilate and Jesus. So if we turn to John 18, starting verse 28, actually let's move down 29. Pilate came out to them and said, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" And they said, "If he weren't a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." So that's where, again, they tried to couch, they wanted Jesus put to death because of what? You remember what their charge was? Blasphemy. Blasphemy. That has nothing to do with religious civil course. Blasphemy is purely a religious thing that Rome doesn't care about. At least the Jewish blasphemy. So they had to find another reason. So they found these reasons, and they said, if he weren't a criminal, we wouldn't have handed him over to you. Yeah, right. Okay. So Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." And they say, "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Before, Jesus had said that as Moses raised the serpent on the stake, so he, the Son of Man, would be raised on the stake. And then another time he reiterated that he would be raised on the stake, crucified. If the Jews had killed him, how would that death have occurred? How did the Jews kill people? Stoning. Stoning. But Jesus said, "I'm not going to die by stoning. I'm going to die on a cross, on a stake." So, handed over to Romans, the Roman execution, so that Jesus' own prophecy would be fulfilled. Verse 33, Pilate then went back inside, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus doesn't say yes or no. He tries to get Pilate to think about his own question. He says, "Pilate, are you asking that for yourself? Did you come up with that? Or did they already tell you about me? Are you just reiterating what they've said? How interested, Pilate, are you to know?" Now, I think Pilate already knew the circumstances. I don't think any of this was a surprise to Pilate. I think the night before, the Jews had already approached Pilate, because I think some of that crowd that went to arrest Jesus included some of the Roman soldiers. That's my thought. It doesn't say that. It's just my thought. So I think Pilate already knew the circumstances. Pilate already knew that Jesus was well liked by the crowd. He did not ignore the fact that a week earlier Jesus rode a donkey into town with everybody screaming and shouting, "Hallelujah! Hosanna!" This occurred. Pilate was not oblivious to this. Pilate would not have been oblivious to the idea or to the fact that Jesus overturned the table. He was in Jerusalem for a purpose, and that purpose was to keep the peace during Passover. So he had eyes on the streets anyway. So he knew everything that was going on. So I don't think he was surprised about any of this. And Matthew has even told us why, that he knew why the Jews brought Jesus to him. And we'll circle back to that maybe. Okay. Where was I? And Pilate's response, "Am I a Jew? Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you've done?" And Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." Pilate tries to evade that prompting because Jesus is saying, yes, I am a king, but it's not the kind of king that they say I am. It's not the kind of king you're thinking. Trying to get him, well, I say he's trying. To me, it's a prompt. To me, it's a prompt to get Pilate to see who Jesus might be. "Oh, you are a king then," said Pilate. And Jesus answered, "You say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." So Jesus is saying, I'm not that kind of king. I'm a king who speaks truth. If you want to know the truth, you'll think through and listen to me. And then Pilate has this interesting comment, this retort. What is truth? Now, a lot of people, and it could be true, a lot of people use this as Pilate is simply dismissing Jesus. Pish posh, what is truth? And that very well could be. Let's see, I wrote all this down. Let me look at this. Kind of like blowing off Jesus. It's kind of akin to saying, you're a prisoner, you're from Galilee, what do you know anyway? Because Galileans were the hicks of society. So what would this guy have to know about truth? He might also be saying truth is negotiable. Truth changes depending on the situation. Boy, we have a lot of that today, don't we?
Yes.
When people say this is true, well, what is true?
What is your definition?
What is your definition of truth? That's right.
Changes every day.
In this circumstance, truth is this. So don't tell me about truth. I'll figure out truth for myself based on the situation that I see, my own perceptions. I also wonder if it's possible that because Pilate knew the situation, that Jesus wasn't really, there was no merit for conviction. That that Pilate is just offering a hypothetical question to himself. What is truth? What is truth in this matter? If I could really dig down to the bottom of it, what's the truth of all of this? Now that may be giving Pilate too much credit, but it's another way of seeing this question. What is truth? What is the truth in all of this? So not necessarily saying that Jesus didn't have it, not necessarily saying that it's situational, but saying in this matter, I wonder what the truth really is, because I know that they're not telling me the truth. I don't know that I expect the truth from the convict. So I wonder what the truth really is. And then he goes out to the Jews and he says, I find no basis for charge against him. He proclaims him innocent. Interesting. When at Passover a lamb was sacrificed, that lamb must first be checked for blemishes and proclaimed blemish-free. Pilate proclaims innocence for Jesus. He has been tested. No guilt has been found in him. Honestly, the religious leaders found no guilt in him. They had to push an agenda to make it happen. So, Jesus has been tested and no guilt has been found. No blemish has been found. But it's your custom for me to release one prisoner at a time at Passover. Now we get back to this Barabbas fellow. Before I go to Barabbas, remember Matthew gives us a little vignette about Pilate's wife. Why would Matthew tell us about Pilate's wife? If you flip back over, verse 19. Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat and his wife sent him a message that says, don't have anything to do with this innocent man. Why would Matthew include that? Why would that even be there?
So nobody can call God in fear. Everybody's been, has an opportunity to change.
Ooh, I like this. So everybody has an opportunity to change their mind or to do the right thing. Okay? And that probably influenced Pilate a little bit. Pilate is caught in what we call it a catch-22 today. He's caught in the middle because he knows, based on the Roman justice system, there's nothing to convict this guy of. But, and he and the Jews don't have a good relationship. They don't like each other anyway. The Jews start pushing his buttons. And in fact, when we read over, did I put it up here? Probably not. I actually put very few verses up here. In, I believe it's John 12. Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar's." That was a warning that said, we're going to send a note to Caesar to say that you let a rebel go, that you let the opposition to Caesar's kingship go free. And so they started pressing Pilate and his political career. So Pilate is now caught in the middle, and he doesn't know necessarily what to do. Now, Pilate was not necessarily a fearful man, but when you start playing with a person's careers, they start hesitating a little bit. So add to that hesitation the fact that his wife also says, hey, have nothing to do with that guy. Now he's really concerned. Not only,
She also calls him innocent.
she calls him innocent. Absolutely. Interesting. I think partly that is because Matthew wanted to emphasize the difference, or to show the guilt of the Jews. Remember who Matthew's writing to. He's writing to the Jews. Now, unfortunately, humanity has taken that and morphed it into this idea that we call anti-Semitism. And we have, throughout history, berated the Jews, done bad things to the Jews, and used this as kind of the catalyst for that. Everyone is at fault. But Matthew's point, Matthew is writing to the Jews. He wants them to see their part in this. So, I think so. I think, drawing on that innocence, drawing on that idea of innocence.
Wasn't Pilate in hot water with Rome?
We don't know at what point specifically, but Pilate did get into hot water with Rome. When Pilate I can't remember the scenario, but he tried to do something in the temple, and Tiberius told him to take it out, kind of gave him a slap on the hand. And so he was in a little bit of a hot water, and it could be, I'm not saying that it was, but it could be, and that happened, I think, around 33. So if this happened in 33 AD, that Pilate is remembering that little slap on the hand, and so were the Jews. And the Jews are saying, oh, remember that? We'll use that against you. So definitely that could be one of the issues. Where was I going? Some people, later documents, there's a Gospel of Nicodemus that was written later. Not in our canon of works, but there was a Gospel of Nicodemus that tells us that states who Pilate's wife is. We don't actually know. It's not said. But in that document later, it said that Pilate's wife was Claudia Procula, if I said that right. Also, she was the granddaughter of Caesar Augustus. Yeah. She could have been part of the reason that Pilate got his role. And I say part of it because he was recommended to the role by another governor. So, other documents, the history of the church by the historian Origen, say that Claudia, Pilate's wife, became a Christian. And again, that's historical documentation. It is not part of our canon. So do we lick it and stick it? No, but we do say, if that's true, wonder how that plays out. Some people even say that the Claudia that is noted by Paul in 2 Timothy, at the end of 2 Timothy, he always does salutations and things, and he mentions a Claudia. Some people say that that may be this Claudia, this wife of Pilate. That may be a stretch too far. You know, it's interesting, but there's nothing, no documentation whatsoever that links that one.
I think it's just real interesting that he would even consider what she said, that she would send word to him and not be rejected because of the woman's position at that time, more subservient. I just think that's an interesting point to think about. And that it was entered into Matthew, and she said he is innocent, and then Pilate, he goes ahead and says the same thing, that I find no guilt in him. I just think there's an importance in that he listened to her.
And I'm glad you said that. It appears that Pilate and his wife had a good relationship. Because the Roman Senate tried in, I think, 21 AD, somewhere around there, they tried to make it a rule where the wife couldn't be where the judge was. You know, they had to be in different towns. But she was there, and it says something, it seems like she was there, and it says something about she wanted to be there with him during this time. So I think there is something there that speaks to their relationship. And so it could be that they had such a strong relationship that he was like, ooh, I need to really pay attention to this. Maybe. And again, there are things on the other side. Pilate was really harsh to the Jews. He didn't like the Jews. He stole from the temple funds, you know, things like that. And if she was really an advocate for the Jews, then that seems like a dissonance there. If she was a Christian, if she became a Christian, it is supposed that she is the one who told the apostles what happened in the trials. Because the apostles weren't there. Yes, the Holy Spirit could have given them that insight, but it also could be that Claudia, Pilate's wife, knew about everything. Pilate would have gone home and talked about it, I'm sure, to her. And so she's the one that passed on that information. Speculation all, but it's an interesting thought. Let's get to Barabbas right away. So it is apparently a custom at that time that during the Passover they would free one of the prisoners at the request of the crowd. And I believe there were 3 crosses or 3 stakes already put in place outside the wall for Barabbas and his 2 companions. They were waiting. They were in the prison. They were in the jail. They were waiting. And then this Jesus thing happens. And so now there's a choice. We've already got the stake going out there. Barabbas was set to be on it. And so Pilate, knowing what happened a week earlier, what happened a week earlier? Jesus came into town. The people praised Jesus. They loved Jesus. Hurrah for Jesus. And so he's thinking, okay, I'll get out of this. I'll hand this to the people and the people will decide. Possibly expecting that the people would free Jesus and he'd be like, oh, not on me. But it backfired. It backfired because it says anyway that the crowd was stirred up by the religious leaders. And if you throw the word blaspheme into the mix, that's the one trigger that the crowd is going to accept. They're going to be like, oh, back off. Interesting. Plus, if Barabbas was a rebel, an insurrectionist, someone who wanted to kick Rome out, he might have been a hero to the crowd. You know? I'm glad this is in here. All four Gospels talk about it. This is a lesson for us, but it's in here because it really reveals this idea of choosing sides. The name Barabbas. You know how names have meaning in the Bible? The name Barabbas Bar is son of. Abba, we've heard that before, haven't we? Father, son of the Father. Oops, I'm not going to capitalize it. Because Abba was like daddy. It was the human father. We don't know if his name was Jesus. Matthew puts it down as Jesus Barabbas. Or if that was added later, probably it wasn't. So Jesus, son of the Father. Or Jesus, son of the Father. Son of God. These were their choices. Who do you pick, Pilate says? Who do you want to have among you, to live among you, to be free? And who do you want to put at the stake? Son of the earthly father, the world, the choices of the world, or Son of God, the choices of heaven. Which one did they choose? But the real question is, which one do we choose? Because we have the same choice. Every day. Every day you wake up, who are you going to follow? Which one are you going to set free? Which one did Judas set free? We get the same choice. Are we going to say, free Barabbas? Coincidence? I don't think so. God moves in wonderful ways, and to see this choice in front of the people, I think that was very purposeful. Okay, we'll rush through this other part. So Pilate, back in Matthew, verse 24, basically says, I don't have any qualms with this guy, with Jesus. But because the uproar was starting, and not only did they say what they said about, Caesar, but if there was an uproar, if there was a chaos in the town, that would be reported to Caesar, and then he would lose face there as well. So he saw the uproar was starting. He took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. This was not a Roman custom. The washing of hands to symbolize cleanliness was not a Roman custom. It was purely Jewish. I believe Pilate is mocking the Jews. He's taking a custom that he probably finds kind of weird anyway, but he's taking a custom and using it against them. And he's saying, I washed my hands are clean. I am not at guilt. And then he says, it's your responsibility. Have we heard that before? Maybe a few verses earlier? when Judas threw the money back and said, I've done something bad, and the priest said, what? What's that to us? This is on you. This is your responsibility. Now, Pilate is using that against the Jews. Matthew is writing this to really expose the hypocrisy of the Jews. And we have to remember, this is Matthew's intent. Luke, John, they are writing to other people, so they draw out different other points. But Matthew's intent is to really expose the hypocrisy of the Jews and the innocence of Jesus. One other thing that Pilate does to mock the Jews, and we haven't got to it yet, we will, is the sign that he puts on Jesus' cross. It was custom to put the crime that that criminal committed on the cross so that those passing could say, oh, don't commit that crime, this is what happens. Well, the crime that Jesus committed was that he was King of the Jews. That's what he put. Jesus the Messiah, King of the Jews. He wrote that on the sign. And then the Jews said, don't say that. Say that he was, that he said he was King of the Jews. And Pilate said, what I wrote, I wrote. In other words, see how dumb you look. I think in Pilate's mind, he was mocking the Jews, the religious Jews. So I think he's doing this, he's washing his hands, not because he truly felt like he was free of guilt. No one is free of guilt. You, me, Dave, King David, Apostle Paul, all the way back to Adam and Eve, we all are guilty of putting Jesus on the cross. But he took it because of the joy set before him. That joy, that knowing that we would be redeemed. That's something that we can appreciate, but we can't fathom. It's like, thank you, I appreciate that. I have no idea how deep that joy was. That had to be a very deep joy to experience that, to go through with that for us. Not only the cross, remember we talked about this, the replacing of our position and our penalty doesn't stop with the death, the horrific death. He had to accept the eternal death. So he had to somehow, and this is again something we don't fathom, go through this concept of being apart from God. When he was on the cross, my Father, my God, why have you forsaken me? God turned his back. He was separated from God. We have never experienced that, even in our worst of moments. But Jesus took that on himself for us. Claiming the blame. Claiming the blame. So Pilate says it's your responsibility. Their response. What was their response?
We'll take it.
Say again?
We'll take it.
We'll take it. Yes, we'll take it. Basically they say, let me get down to it here.
25.
Verse 25, all the people answered, and all the people includes the religious leaders, his blood is on us and on our children. Interesting. And it's also interesting how soon we forget or how quickly we want to change the past. Because if we flip over to Acts 5, when the apostles were teaching, and the Sanhedrin told them not to, they said, don't be teaching in the name of Jesus. They said, Acts 25, let me get over there too. Verse 28. We gave you strict orders not to teach in his name, the high priest said. Yet you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching and are determined to make us guilty of this man's blood. Now wait a minute. They told Pilate his blood be on us and our children. But now they're saying, ooh, you're trying to make his blood be on us. Oh, sounds like us too though, doesn't it? We have to be sure that we don't do the same thing. say that. That's not what I meant. Right? Now I crossed my fingers behind my back. I didn't mean that. So it's interesting that we can say one thing at one time and then refute it at another time. We're the same way. So before we accuse them too hard, we have to look at ourselves. Thoughts?
I was just thinking about that Pilate and his wife, and that one statement that, things were not going the way he wanted. I think, like what you said, he was thinking that people are going to remember last week.
Yes.
And they're going to say, it was Jesus. But he didn't. That comment, things, when he saw things weren't going his way.
He tried, and I may have this, he tried several times. No, I don't have it. Multiple times, it looks like he tried to release Jesus. He told them that he found no guilt in it. He tried to have, put the judgment back on them. You try it. Not me, you try it. They said, we can't. He said unto Herod, I don't want to be Herod, you try it. He had him flogged. We haven't gotten to that. I skipped that part. I don't know if you noticed. I skipped that part because I'm going to combine it next time with the actual crucifixion, because it's kind of part of what happens normally on a conviction. But he had him flogged, hoping that that would be enough to, calm them down. And then finally, he tried to say, he tried to use the Passover release, and the crowd, hoped the crowd would accept him for release. So he tried multiple times to release Jesus. And I don't know, we can't say, Pilate was not a good man, but there was a sense of Roman justice that it looks like he was trying to uphold to some degree.
He might have just been scared of his wife.
He was probably scared of his wife. Scared of his wife, scared that his position would be taken away. Rome was really quick to respond to things, and they could easily pull you out of your position and send you to Siberia. Not necessarily Siberia, but take you away. Banish you. So he was very cautious about his role and his position. That could easily be removed. And in fact, it was in AD 36.
But we didn't really hit on the reason that she sent him the note that he's innocent is because of a dream.
A dream of some sort. A dream of some sort about Jesus.
Like you said, God works in strange ways.
Right.
A lot of times you dream about what you have been focused on or thinking about during the day.
Yes.
I mean, all these happenings that went on, the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, had to be on people's minds, whether they were Jew or not. And things were going on. She knew that. Women, I think, talk more. I know they do. And they visit with each other about what's going on in the city or in the group they're in. So it had to be weighing heavy on her mind for her to dream that.
Yes, and it very likely was that, as I mentioned, I think Pilate knew about all of this before this occurred, and he had had conversations with his wife about it. Those religious leaders asked me for a bunch of soldiers today, and to go get some fellow named Jesus. Not necessarily knowing what was about to happen, but understanding what was about to happen. And so they may have already had conversation about it. So to add to the full week's worth of events, now they've had a personal one-on-one conversation. She has a dream, and dreams can happen in many ways in the Bible, as we know. This could have been simply a dream that disturbed her, but the Greek does seem to indicate that she experienced great pain, discomfort. So it's not necessarily just consternation from a psychological perspective. It's potentially some sort of physical pain that she was experiencing related to this as well. And so she tells her husband, hey, Be real careful. That was something else we didn't talk about. I know we're over time, but when he found out that Jesus claimed to be the Son of God, there was a moment in which it says, and I believe it's in John, when he found out that Jesus claimed to be Son of God, it says Pilate was concerned, and he came back in and he talked to Jesus even more. Well, in the Roman mind, gods could come to earth, not the Jewish mind, but the Roman mind, gods could come to earth and walk among them and have kids. And you didn't want to be mean to them. And so when he heard that, he's like, ooh, let me just be sure before I do this. And so there was something there that potentially triggered his hesitation. You know, from a Roman perspective, if we look at that from a Roman perspective, the fact that he claimed to be Son of God was enough for pause. Good stuff. You know, I mean, we could probably talk about this for 3 weeks, but we won't. We'll move on. Let's pray and then we'll be dismissed. Lord, thank you so much that Jesus was committed to the task. We can't fathom how hard that task was. The fact that he gave up heaven to start with, to be born into this world, and to live a sinless life, that in and of itself is far beyond what we can understand. But then to forfeit that life at the hands of people who hated him, knowing that he was innocent. But even more than that, Lord, as he hung on the cross, accepting the sacrifice physically, he also accepted the sacrifice spiritually. He accepted our punishment from you. The wrath that you have for each one of us because of our sin was put on him. Far more than we can comprehend. But Father, we know just enough that we can be grateful that he did that for us. That he loves us enough to go through with that. But Father, help us to not end there. Help us to always move beyond the death and to celebrate in the victory over death, the resurrection that he had, the power that you and he had over death, and that we can be a part of that resurrection as well. That we can have eternity in heaven with you because of Jesus. Help us to live faithfully. Help us to walk as ambassadors of Jesus and let other people see us and celebrate Jesus because of us. Thank you, Father, for the blessings you give us and for the friendships that we have and the love that we share together. We pray these things through your Son's name.